Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Salmon Trout Steelheader podcast today. I have a special guest from Oregon, and Southern Oregon in particular, from Sawyer Oars. Zac Kauffman is here with me today. Zac, why don't you tell us about what you do for Sawyer and where you're located?
Well, thank you very much, Lucas. Like Lucas said, my name is Zac Kauffman with Sawyer Paddles and Oars, and currently I'm the CEO of the company. Sawyer has gone through a few change of ownerships in its last 55 years of operation. You know, our founder, Ralph Sawyer, started the company back in 1967 in a little town of Rogue River. And since then, it's only moved to the small town of Talent, Oregon. So we've been an Oregon-based company that whole time. And we've been through a couple of different owners. And currently, we have a trifecta partnership in the ownership of the company. So my official title is the CEO, and that mainly means I'm just the chief administrator of the company. And the two other partners are our production supervisor and our quality control supervisor. So basically, two of the partners are in the shop getting goopy every day and making all of our product. And then I pretty much work closely with our sales and marketing team and make sure that all our shipping and receiving gets orchestrated daily. And so that's a little short bit of what I do and where we are at. And we're pretty much manufacturing paddles and oars for everything human-powered on water. And Driftboat companies are definitely a large customer base of ours. We definitely build quite a few oars for a lot of the boat builders around the Pacific Northwest and around the country. And then we also build, kayak paddles, SUP paddles. Canoe paddles are really where we started. Like our founder, Ralph Sawyer, was a marathon canoe racer, which is not something you hear a lot about here in the West. But so that was really his passion, and he actually, was racing canoes. Moved out west here. He was going to make canoe paddles and canoes, and immediately found that the rivers of the West were a little bit swifter and steeper with a lot more rocks than the lakes of the Midwest. So he just shifted away from canoes and went strictly to paddles. And then shortly thereafter, in the late 60s, early 70s, we started making oars due to the persistence of the founder of Willie Driftboats. They also started here in the Southern Oregon area around the same time. And so Ralph and Willie got together and kind of just started making wooden paddles and wooden oars. And the first oar that Ralph made was the Sawyer Light. And the Sawyer Light is still in production today with a few changes and adaptations from where it started. But that is the original oar pattern of Sawyer. And also the foundation for a lot of our newer models that are also very popular. So
That's really cool. Now, one of the things, you just mentioned one of your partners involved in quality control, and one of the things that I appreciate about Sawyer, obviously beyond the looks and the quality and stuff, is you actually do have an Oregon manufactured process. Does that make it difficult with the competition these days?
yeah, well, I think that being an Oregon-based, a U.S.-based manufacturing company does have its challenges. Obviously there's folks that are sourcing their products overseas to cut costs on labor and materials and such. But a lot of that is really that being manufactured in the U.S. and primarily sourced in the U.S. as far as our raw materials. Our Douglas firs come from the Pacific Northwest. Our ponderosa pine, our western red cedars. That's all sourced here in the Pacific Northwest, and so a lot of the woods that are the foundation of Sawyer are here in the Pacific Northwest as well. And so as an Oregon-based manufacturer, we do pretty much have a lot of our manufacturing abilities within our own control. Like we're not waiting on somebody to ship us a container or something, And but because of that, we also can't just increase our output because the demand has changed. And so I mean that handcrafted product, it does take some time. I mean one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is just a square top or a paddle with some fiberglassing on it, from raw material wood to finished product, out of the varnish room, out of the rope wrapper, and then labeled and tagged. That process itself is anywhere from 14 on the real speedy side to 20 to 25 days on a normal cycle. So like a run of square tops, basically we can only produce X amount of those every month. And then the other thing is that yes, they are, as you mentioned, they're handcrafted. So that's we think of it as the oars that we're shaping out of wood are like how they shape surfboards. Our guys that work in the back are very, very seasoned craftsmen, and they basically are shapers. They take a 10-quarter plank of solid white ash and jigsaw cut it out, and then put it on the lathe, put it on the planer, and once they get it roughed out, then there's just hours and hours on the sanders basically shaping the product and getting that raw wood piece to what that foundation core needs to be. Then it moves on. Like some of the products like the Sawyer Light and the Smoker Drifter, those are more of a wood-based product that don't get a lot of, they don't get any fiberglassing, but they do get some extra, pro tips and stuff like that. But those products pretty much stay in the woodworking part of the shop, go into tipping, then into varnish, and then rope wrap, and they're done. Where it gets to be more time consuming is kind of the hybrid product that people have really grown to love these days, is like the products like our square tops, because it goes through that same process of the woodworking and has to get all the lathe work, all the planer work, all the different glue ups, gets shaped. Then from there it goes into overwrap on the shaft. Then it comes back to shaping. Then it goes into the glassing station and gets overglassed on the blade via either fiberglass or carbon or both, depending on what the flavor is going to be. A lot of different unidirectional carbons and fiberglasses that we use for reinforcement. And so that's a lot of that process, where a square top may stay in the glassing department for the whole week, from basically getting one side prepped, the other side prepped, one side done, the other side done, going back into finish, going into cut, going back into redo, and so that whole process takes quite a bit of time. And then pretty much every ore product goes into the tipping station before it goes into finished product. And so every ore we make, except for a utility ore, gets a pro tip on it, and a handful of paddles get pro tips on them as well. And so the Sawyer Pro Tip is really kind of what protects every ore blade and every paddle tip. And it's a very heavy duty material that takes a lot of that abuse of abrasion and impact resistance, and that's very key to when you're building a product out of wood.
Totally. That's what amazes me. I have a couple things here. Maybe one more of a statement and then some questions here with it. The statement being that when you look at the beauty of Sawyer Oars, I mean the quality of wood, the quality of craftsmanship, the fact that you guys are working with both like um, Northwest woods as well as carbon fiber and fiberglass is something that is obviously labor intensive from the way that you described it. However, what I have noticed with Sawyer is for how beautiful they look and all that, they seem to still be somewhat reasonable on pricing, even though they're a USA product. So what I'm wondering is how do you guys manage to get such a quality product, but not have to go to ridiculous pricing?
Well, I mean, it's a challenge to stay within the market parameters, and as a U.S. manufacturer, when it comes down to the retail store, the end consumer is not necessarily just looking for a U.S. manufactured product. They're looking, they're basically buying on price and performance of the product. So it's really, we've just kind of went with a holistic approach to, build the brand and build the, really the kind of the concept of what you get with Sawyer, and that in turn kind of helps us kind of gauge where our pricing is. Obviously there's a lot of our oars that people would say that they're very expensive and priced out of what their range is. But we also have several oars that compete directly with oars that are shipped in from overseas and oars that are mass produced in fiberglass plants. And, so, I mean, we basically have a wide variety. And so the biggest thing with Sawyer is that we try to cover, three different levels of pricing, and knowing that, obviously somebody who's just getting started is not necessarily going to be looking to make the investment that a, full-time guide is. And so, by putting the performance features in there and getting people to buy on performance versus price is really the huge difference for us. Is just we work primarily with small mom and pop brick and mortar shops that have sales folks that can explain the features of our product to their customers. And as long as you understand the features, the features justify the price. And that's a lot of it. And then there's not the blending of woods and composites. There are definitely a lot of composite oar manufacturers, and there are very few wood oar manufacturers. But the blending of woods and composites are key.
Well, that to me seems like the part that sets you guys apart in such a major fashion. Before I was really familiar with Sawyer and kind of learned more about it, I always knew that they were, gorgeous, beautiful oars, but I thought kind of more, kind of an artisan look for easy going rivers and stuff. Come to find out, looking at what you guys have done in carbon fiber and fiberglass in combination, which, by the way, two very different materials. Doug fir is not a hardwood, and
Right.
and as you know, their wood has all that expandability and shrinkage opportunities, and so you guys are working with two different materials, working them together. Like you said, lots of carbon fiber manufacturers on the market, but that mixture of wood and carbon fiber is unique. When did you guys start adding other materials into your oars?
Well, I mean, one of the not so known parts of the manufacturing of the square top, which was really something that was a concept that was developed by one of the past owners of Sawyer, Bruce Bergstrom, was really the one that came up with the whole concept. And it really came out of the original fur lamb Dynalite, which was a laminated fir shaft similar to the Sawyer Light, and then the Dynalite blade, which was basically similar to the Dynalite blade but built onto an oar shaft instead of just as a blade. So if you figure the Sawyer Light existed, the Dynalite blade existed, and Bruce kind of came to this point where he was like, hey, if we put these two together, then we can make something a little bit nicer than than the wood ore that people are not using as much. I want to stay competitive in the market. And so that ore was produced and in turn was an immediate hit. And it was basically, you had that nice lightweight Dynamite blade and that soft flex of that laminated Doug fir shaft on a Sawyer Light, and people love those. But the real issue with those is people are like, man, these are super light and the swing weight is so nice. I just really like this ore, but it wasn't really beefy, and so it really just from the get go, they were overbladed and under shaft. And so basically the blade was really strong, the shaft had a nice flex to it, but guides would push it and run their 18-foot gear boat or run their 18-foot 4-person drift boat, and they would break the blade off the shaft, or they would fracture the shaft. And so the concept of blending woods and composites came from Bruce as well, which he was someone who would basically didn't want to just had a minor crack in a shaft, but the ore was mostly still there. He was working with ways to try and figure out how to repair wooden shafts, right? And so his plan for repairing wooden shafts was basically, you get the wooden shaft back, pry it apart, glue it back together, clamp it all down, and then overwrap it in fiberglass and reinforce it, and then basically get it back out in the market with some guides, and had some kind of product testing. And it was kind of like, at that point, came to kind of an aha moment, and it was like, what if we just actually sent these out of the gate with this reinforcement, and voila, the overwrap was built, and then the square top version basically came about from really just trying to work with the swing weight. And we did not invent the concept of a square top. If you look way back to oars, 100 years ago, there were definitely square top oars because people would not actually round out the upper portion of the oar when they were carving them by hand, because it was just less work, right? Yeah. And so square tops always did exist, and we have a pair that was probably made in the 50s sitting in our warehouse, and that was kind of the concept. It was like, hey, this little extra material up top here will help the swing weight, and so the first square top was made, and that was almost 10 years ago now. And at first people were a little bit kind of cautious, didn't really know what to think about it, and was kind of like, no, I think oars are supposed to be round, that's how they're supposed to be. But the more and more people rode them, it was like, hey, this has got something here. And that was kind of just blending all those concepts together. So keeping with that really light Dynamite blade, in turn, what Bruce figured out is that you could actually diminish mass in the shaft, so you didn't need to have the oar shaft to be the same diameter as a Sawyer Light. You could actually diminish that shaft because you're going to put all this fiberglass and carbon fiber over the top of it. So you could diminish that mass, in turn taking more weight out of the oar shaft, and then leaving a little extra mass above the rowing fulcrum. In turn, the square top was developed as just an extremely light swing weight, balanced oar without putting any counterbalancing weight into it. So, and that's one of the things that we constantly correct people on, is people refer to the square top as a counterbalanced oar, and it's not a counterbalanced oar, because a counterbalance would mean that you're putting counterweight into the shaft. But it's actually a balanced oar by design, just by having light blade, light shaft, and a little extra heavier shaft above the rowing fulcrum. In turn, gives it extremely balanced and light swing weight.
Well, why don't you explain that concept of swing weight really quick to our listeners? Because I think that's very essential. I know in the fishing rod world, there's this idea of, oh, you want the lightest blank, but in reality, you want a balanced blank so that it's not fatiguing. And is this a similar concept with swing weight, or how would you describe that?
Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, there used to be, probably back 10, 15 years ago, we used to sell little oar stands to retail shops, just so you basically a spot that you could have an oar lock, so that you could actually show folks, what the swing weight of an oar is, and
Yeah.
and so the whole idea is that if you talk about people that row counterbalance composites, right? And it's like, why do you run a counterbalance composite? Because you're putting more weight in the handle to balance up the weight of the blade so that it has a much easier swing weight. And so, like, that's the concept. And if you talk with people about the balancing of their oar by counterbalancing, now you take that to wood, and basically you're trying to just make it balance in the oar lock. And so, like, one of the things we do when we go to a trade show is we have like just a little rowing stand. It's just a tripod with some oar locks on it, and just so people can actually grab onto that handle and move it into the rope wrap zone and feel just the difference of different oars and different swing weight. And then you go like, okay, well, if you're going to fish for 6-8 hours, what are you going to hold in your hand all day? It's that
Yeah.
that oar handle right there. And so, I mean, it's like kind of bringing that concept to people so they understand what the overall swing weight really is.
Yeah, and it makes all the difference on the water. One thing that you mentioned that was interesting is the original owner coming out from Midwest. This West Coast I has some incredible rivers and places that people float and stuff that people put their oars through here. I don't know if there's anywhere else in the world where people put as much abuse on their oars. So with that in mind, has the West Coast drift boat market been hard on oars, or how have you guys adapted to that?
Well, I mean, so Sawyer has always been known as a manufacturing company that uses what they build, right? We've always had folks in the ownership or in the the upper management and sales of the company that were experienced in the usage of the product. I myself used to be, a Sawyer customer before I started working here.
Hmm.
I ran Sawyer Oars for 20 years when I was guiding, and I always basically would, guiding in Southern Oregon, you had the ability to just come to the factory back in those days, and I always spent some time talking with Bruce, the previous owner, and just kind of seeing what he had going on, and he always wanted to talk with guides to try and get some input of what's going on. And so Sawyer has always had a large handful of the market in the guiding industry, and that has always been used for kind of getting feedback on a product. And we make some outfitting specific products that other companies don't make, and so that's also kind of helped us kind of stay in that market. And that's for whitewater and for fishing, and then also just working with boat manufacturers. A lot of the designs that we build and are our primary designs have come by working with specific boat manufacturers and really just kind of developing a blade profile that they want or a specific version of our oar that they want. And then in turn, when they help us develop a product, they're of course completely engaged with it and fully behind it, and they help sell it to their customer base. And in turn, it just kind of, we put that energy into developing a product, and then you have like instantaneous folks that are going to be promoting it because they're partially engaged with it.
That's what makes all the difference, is listening to the community. And you guys, obviously, as a company, have done that for years. I see so many guides rowing Sawyers, and when I ask them, they're just like, "Oh yeah, these things are great."
Yeah, I mean, the square top really came about and started where, we would go to functions where, there was a lot of guides around in various clinics and like just some of these sales events. And we would basically talk with guides and, especially guides that have been doing it for a long time, and they would start telling you about how they have elbow problems and shoulder problems and it's like, yeah, I'm rowing for 8 hours a day, 6 7 days a week, and it's really wearing on my body. And they're starting to look at it as like, hey, this is really getting to be a little too hard for me to do all this many days. And so we would talk to them about swing weight and try and get them to understand that, I think, that the thing you're holding in your hand all day are the oars, not the fishing rod. So, you should probably, make a little upgrade on your oars. And you would get them to understand the concept of the swing weight of the square top, and they would actually buy a pair of square tops. And then, a year would pass, and you would go to that same event, and those guides would come by and be like, hey, when you were telling me about this, I had so many reservations. I wasn't ready to make that investment. But now that I actually made that investment and really have a nice pair of oars, it adds more hours to my day, more days to my week, and I fully believe that I can guide for more years because I've actually made that investment. And that's the thing. Like that's the piece for us, is like, it's working. You're like, absolutely, if we're making a difference for people that are out there rowing for a living, then that definitely helps. And yeah, I mean, you get guides on your product and they're fully behind it. They're some of your greatest patrons. Because like you say, you run across guides all the time. I mean, you're out there fishing all the time, and you run across guides all the time, and it's one of those things that we just love going on the river and floating down, and you see the majority of the people you pass are running some version of our oars.
Oh yeah.
And you're just like, hey, that's great. We're doing something right here.
Yeah, I was hanging out with my buddy Jordan from the YouTube channel Addicted Fishing, and I was telling him you need to get some Sawyer oars, and he brought me out to his garage and showed me some square tops already on the raft, and I was like, oh, okay,
Okay.
fair enough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I was talking to Big Dave too, and I was Wilson River, and I was like, hey, you ever rode those Sawyer oars or whatever? He's like, yeah, I got square tops on my drift boat right now, and I'm like, oh, okay. Good stuff. It's a common theme. These guys that have gone to a lot of different oars, either discovering Sawyer or coming back to Sawyer after they had some, and seeing the new models. Now, one particular model that kind of interested me, I went into Clackcraft drift boats in Clackamas there about a week ago, and got to hang out with Jake Gregg there and talk with him, and he was showing me an oar with kind of an X-weave over it and a mountain drift boat blade. And I think he said those were specific to Clackcraft. Can you tell me anything about that model, or do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, so basically the Mountain Drift Boat blade is a blade that was developed with Gary Beebe, and Gary used to be a clack dealer. He has an operation out in Idaho, and he was one of the probably one of the top retailers of Clackcraft drift boats in Idaho for many years, and he's since kind of getting into retirement mode, but because of that, because of his affiliation with Clackcraft, his mountain drift boat profile is only sold through him and through Clackcraft. And so that blade, the mountain drift boat blade, is for people that are familiar with Sawyer. The mountain drift boat blade is just a little bit bigger and a little different dimension than a Sawyer shoal cut blade. And a lot of people don't realize that the Sawyer shoal cut blade and the mountain drift boat blade were developed at the same time. Bruce was working with Gary developing that blade, and he had other boat manufacturers. I think Mike out at Stealthcraft out in Michigan had some input on it, and they all basically Bruce was working with these driftboat manufacturers, and Bruce also had a large kayaking background, and so he's kind of like, well, what you guys are talking about, this makes sense to me, but basically we're just gonna make an oar blade like a kayak blade. And so that's kind of where the shoal cut came from, and Gary basically had his ideas for really kind of wanting a little more shoulder on it, and it's kind of got a little different geometry to a shoal cut, but they're very similar. And that blade in particular was actually first made as a fur-lamb dynalite. Right, so that was one of those fur-lamb dynalites like we were talking about earlier, and the oars that you now find at Clackecraft are basically the latest version of that. So those oars they have the X-weave overwrap on the shaft. They've got the nice Mountain Driftboat dynalite blade, and theirs are actually, I think they're co-branded, so they say Mountain Driftboat on one side, they say Clackecraft on the other side, and then both of them say by Sawyer underneath that logoing. And so we have kind of a trifecta co-brand going on with those oars, but it still has that total lightweight, heavy-duty dynalite blade. Then the diminished mass in the shaft, which is that fur-lamb based shaft, overwrapped by the X-weave, and in turn, by just cutting down the amount of mass in the shaft, basically gives that oar a very nice light flex and feel, and in turn a very light swing weight. And so that's really where the non-square Mountain Driftboat oar came from, and that's an oar we still produce today, obviously for Clackecraft and for Mountain Driftboat.
What would you say is the best kind of situation or angling drift boating situation to purchase those oars for? What type of water?
So both the Mountain Driftboat and the shoal cut really excel in shallow water. And the biggest difference of those blades versus a standard blade is that the blades actually have a top and bottom on them. So the blade actually has more mass below the center line of the shaft than it does above the center line of the shaft. And so in turn, if you're on an inside corner and one oar is only in a couple inches of water and the other oar is out in the fast current in deep water, you're going to be able to get a good significant pull even on that shallow oar side. And so really those blade profiles just completely excel in shallow water, and because of that, there's several companies out there trying to knock them off, and that's why you see some of these other blades popping up that look a lot like a Mountain Driftboat or a shoal cut.
Hey, if you're doing it right, someone's going to copy it.
That's right. Like they say, yeah, what is that?
Imitation flattery.
Duplication is just another form of flattery.
Yeah, sincerest form of flattery, for sure.
Sincerest form, exactly.
Yeah, so now if I were to recommend to a driftboat angler, like a lot of my buddies who are out here in the winter, they're hard on their gear, what would you say is the good workhorse Sawyer oar?
So there's a couple things that we kind of go through with folks on when they're choosing their oars, and you kind of one of the things is what people want is they have all these specific points of their rowing over the year, right? And they're kind of like, well, I want an oar that does this really well, and I want an oar that does this really well, and so the first concept that you have to talk with people about is what is the water that you row the most? And if the most of the water is pretty shallow and technical, as with our rivers kind of being low this year, people are going to run a lot of skinny water. So, basically we try and kind of find out what they're going to row, and then really just kind of what is the level of water. Are they running class 3, 4 all the time? Are they running class 1, 2 whitewater? If they're running smaller class rapids, then it comes into more of, let's find an oar that's comfortable to row for 8 hours at a time. And so really with the two square tops is really where we put a lot of emphasis on. The carbon version of the square top is really for that customer that's going to run quite a bit more whitewater. They're going to put some pretty big whitewater demand on their oars. But if they're just fishing and they're primarily running, class 2 plus, then the X-Weave is actually providing a lot more flex than the carbon version. And that really gives it kind of just, that oar is not going to be as abusive on the body when you're rowing it for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then we really have kind of the softest flexing oar is the VLAM oar. And that VLAM square top has a soft blade and a soft flexing shaft. But guides sometimes just kind of steer away from those because they look too pretty. So they look too sexy and they're just like, oh, I couldn't row these, I'm going to hurt them. But really, when we're talking about square tops, it really does dove nicely into talking about fly rods, because really with square tops, we kind of have the 3 different flexes. And if I have an angler that I'm talking to, I can easily explain to him that, the carbon square top is your fast action tip flex. The X-Weave Dynalite is your mid flex. And then your VLAM is your full flex, and that's the thing, is basically the carbon square top is pretty stiff, but you have that carbon blade through the carbon shaft, so the shorter oars don't have nearly the flex that, say, a 10-foot oar does. And so, definitely people that are running much longer oars, we want to kind of push them towards a square top carbon, because they've got a lot of leverage. Right?
Yeah.
But mostly here in the West, a lot of people are just running 9-foot oars. So in a 9-foot oar, a carbon is not going to flex as much. So then you go down to that Dyno X version. They still get that nice stiff carbon Dynalite blade, but a little bit more flex in the shaft with the X-Weave. And so if you figure that when you're loading up the energy in an oar, the blade is not going to have much give, but once you get past the blade, you're going to start to get that little bit of flex and then rebound off each rowing stroke on the X-Weave. And that's kind of your mid flex. When you go to the VLAM blade, actually you're going to get the full flex because you have a softer blade and the softer shaft. So when you start to flex a VLAM, the arc of the blade and the shaft is actually almost continuous. And so it just has a nice even flex from the tip of the blade to the handle of the blade. And that's the VLAM square top. And I'd say for anybody that really wants that just best feeling wood flex with a square top, that's the one to get. And so, we do definitely talk a lot of square tops and solid wood oars with folks. And the other thing is that you have to kind of make sure they're aware that, you cannot emulate the flex and feel of wood in any composite, right? Because there's junctions in composites. And so they have to be aware of the fact that it's all one piece. And so, if you break a piece off, more than likely you have to replace the whole thing. And that's a hard concept to get people to understand. And also some folks are limited because of just how they have to transport things. We sell a lot of multi-piece oars to folks in Alaska because they're like, I need to be able to break this thing down and stuff it in a plane.
Oh.
And, you can't do that with a square top.
Yeah.
And when we've looked at it, multiple times, people are always asking us to build a 2-piece square top, and the flex and feel is just, it's lost. The continuous wood is what really makes that oar, all those oars, feel the way they do. And it's just kind of one thing about being able to hold in your hand the same chunk of wood that runs all the way through the oar out to the tip of the blade. And explaining that concept to people are just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. The fact that I'm holding on to the same piece. There's no junction. In a composite oar, ours and all of our competitors, there's a junction at the handle and there's a junction at the blade. And then some of them even have a middle junction. So every one of those junctions, basically you lose the energy that you're trying to transfer to the blade.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, the wood is a living, breathing thing essentially with those unique wood fibers and feel, and obviously, I love the idea that you're building out of Doug fir and the red cedar and such. So that those wood fibers, you're not going to find that in a man-made material.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just one of those things. It doesn't really come up. It's just not going to feel the same. And I mean, people all the time ask me, well, what oars do you use? And I'm like, well, you got to understand, I boat with a quiver. I mean, I never go on the river without like 3 or 4 different pairs of oars. And I mean, I always go on the river, and we got multiple boats that I'm just. I'm passing oars out to people I'm boating with. I'm like, hey, try these out for a few miles. Let me know what you think of them. And my adult kids boat with me quite a bit, and I kind of notice that they kind of gravitate to one particular oar or the other. If we're on the river for like 3 or 4 days, I kind of watch and see like, yeah, every morning they just seem to keep grabbing that particular oar when they load out their boat, and so it's kind of like just kind of always paying attention to what people are doing, and I mean, I absolutely love wood oars, and I mean, I don't necessarily take many composites with me when I go on multi-day trips, because I just love that flex and feel of the wood oars. And I mean, if you can actually if you can store them and then they fit into your boat package or the way that you transport, I think the all wood oar is definitely the way to go. But we do have folks that need to be able to take their blades off, and for various reasons they run composites, and that's that's also a large part of our business, and so we continue to make improvements in that as well.
Well, you guys do it all. There's a lot of other companies that do one bit or piece, and you guys really seem to offer it all. I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on the podcast here with me, Zach. Now, is there a good place to kind of go learn more, kind of in depth, and educate ourselves on these oars? Where would you recommend people go to look more?
Well, I would say, definitely if they want to go to our YouTube channel, we definitely have been spending quite a bit of time actually doing more and more on just doing videos about our products and getting people to kind of engage with what we're doing. And then also, I mean, just really go down to your local boat shop, and really, the Sawyer product is something that really needs to be seen to understand it. I mean, we really encourage people to get out there and touch and feel them, so that you really have an idea of what they are and what you're buying. A lot of us sell online and people buy online, but I mean, we don't recommend buying anything blind. Do your research, and if you can support your local shop and go out there and kind of check them out. Several boat builders throughout the U.S. definitely run Sawyers, and so we do have quite a bit of reputation out there as far as having oars with all of the boat manufacturers, and even the whitewater paddle shops. We do have a lot of dealers around the country that carry a large selection of our oars, and and so I really encourage people to get out there and kind of go visit one of your local shops and just check them out. Test out that flex and feel, and I mean, a lot of boat builders and even paddle shops now that they maybe don't have a little specific isolated area set up for swing weight testing, but just in any shop, usually they have a drift boat sitting on the sales floor, or they have a raft sitting on the sales floor with an oar lock in it. Just ask them, hey, I'm really interested in this oar. Do you mind if I set it in this oar lock, or can you do it for me so I can actually just see what the swing weight is? And I encourage everyone to go out there into any retail store and ask some salesperson about swing weight. because that's really what they need to be telling you about.
Totally. And for anyone that's in the Portland area or Southwest Washington, go check out Clackacraft Driftboats there in Clackamas, Oregon, which is where I am able to go look at the oars in person and such. And like you said, in basically any boat shop with that sells oars, you guys are well distributed in good boat shops.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've definitely been working with almost every major boat manufacturer in the U.S. And we are fortunate to have many of them here in the Western U.S., but also throughout the country. We have a lot of boat builders in Montana, boat builders out east. There's quite a few boat builders in the eastern U.S., and you're starting to see more and more of people rowing rivers out east. That is definitely something that's growing, and even people are starting to row whitewater rivers out east as well, which it used to be more of a paddle boat mentality out east, but people are realizing that, hey, if I have this small little raft and I put oars on it, I can run it by myself. I don't need to have 3 or 4 other people to go with me to paddle it. I can just row it, and it's my own entity. And people really love that freedom, and so there's definitely a lot of options out there for folks, and all these little small boats that are out there available. It's just amazing how many ways there are to get out on the water. And definitely we have seen a lot of interest in the outdoors through the last year or so. So definitely encourage people to go visit your local shop and check out some of this new product that's out there.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Zach. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And everybody, if you guys get a chance to go check out the Sawyer website or their, like Zach was saying, the actual boat shops themselves to take a look, go take a look. And thanks again for listening to the Salmon Trout Steelheader podcast. And if you guys have any comments or anything you want to hear about, please let us know. Thanks again, Zach. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you much, Lucas. We'll talk to you later. We'll see you on the river.
Will do. All right. I'll see you soon, Zach. I'm going to come on down to Southern Oregon and do some fishing.
All right. Sounds great.